So hello everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the Disclosure Podcast. I am your host, Ed, and I thought with today's or this week's episode, I would do kind of a Q&A episode in the sense of I would go through some of the most common questions that I find myself getting asked a lot. And, messages I get in my inbox, or messages people asking me a lot at kind of Q&A sessions after I finished at universities, because some of these questions, these topics are good ones, but it's not always possible to make them into, say, a full podcast, or even to put them in a video. So I thought that this would be a nice format just to maybe go through a few of the questions that I get asked the most, and hopefully you will find interesting. So to give you a little overview just before we start, I'm looking at backyard eggs, dealing with friends and family, that kind of thing. So if that springs to mind, that's something you've asked me before, then this is definitely the podcast for you. And if not, I hope you find it interesting anyway. So let's start with the first question. And the first question is about backyard eggs. This is by far and large one of the questions I get asked most, both by vegans and also by non-vegans as well. Because I think on face value, the idea of it doesn't seem particularly, well, maybe you'd think at face value it seems like it's a fine thing to do. And with that in mind, there are a few kind of components to this to look at. And there's the ethical one, there's the kind of the biological one as well. So let's go through it all. And I think we have to start right from the very beginning of the process, and that is, where do the hens come from in your backyard? So a lot of people who have backyard hens for the eggs, they will buy the hens, and they'll buy the hens from breeders, or even from hatcheries, or even from farmers. And so if you're buying the hens from these places, then you're still supporting the industry, you're still giving money to the industry, and of course that's still not an ethical thing to do. If you're supporting the industry, you're still supporting hatcheries. So you are still supporting the maceration and gassing of day-old male chicks, which, as we can all agree, is not a moral or a good thing to do whatsoever. So that there is that aspect to it. Secondly, if you're buying them from farmers, you're giving money directly to farmers, and they'll use that money to buy in new chicks. So you're still supporting the system. It's a whole supply and demand chain. And if you're providing money to one area of that chain, then you are still, of course, responsible for perpetuating and continuing on the existence of the whole system, so to speak. So, of course, from that perspective, you're buying hens in any way, you're commodifying their bodies, you're placing a price tag on them, you're supporting the industry that you're supposed to be against. And so overall, buying hens from anyone for any reason like that is not ethical. But then let's take it the next stage then, because of course you could argue, well, okay, I'm not buying the hens, I've rescued them. And people rescue hens all the time from battery farms and even free range farms. People will rescue hens that are destined for slaughter. And so you say to yourself, well, this is a really good thing to do, because if I'd not rescued these hens, then of course, well, their fate would be in a slaughterhouse. And if that was the case, then I've actually saved these animals from slaughter. So I've done a really good thing. And of course, you have done a really good thing in saving hens, rescuing them from farms, whether they're free range or caged, it doesn't make a difference. That's a really good thing to do, of course, as long as you're not buying them. And so if you've rescued them and they're now living a happy life because you've provided them with a happy life and they're laying eggs, well, what's the issue with taking those eggs? Because, of course, they're not suffering, these hens, anymore. You've taken them away from their suffering, and now they're living a comparatively free life. Of course, there are aspects of their life that's still not free, but comparatively it's free. And, of course, comparatively, they'll be much happier and much more content. So what would be the issue of taking the eggs now? Because they're not in pain and they're not going to slaughter. And so there's a couple of ways of looking at this. And so let's first do the biological one. Hens have been selectively bred to produce somewhere between 300 and 320 eggs per year. Now, the chickens, the red guinea fowl that they are descendants of, would naturally in the wild lay maybe somewhere between 12 and 20. So significantly more eggs are produced nowadays by these hens because they are bred specifically to become more profitable and to provide more money for the farmers and provide more eggs for the consumers. So these hens, their bodies have a huge amount of strain placed upon them, therefore, because these eggs, the shell is made completely of calcium. And so that's why osteoporosis and broken bones are so prominent in hens, egg-laying hens in farming situations. whether that's free range, organic, it makes no difference because their body is leaching calcium almost on a daily basis through the shells that they're passing and laying. And therefore, if they're not replacing that calcium, which they're often not able to through the feed they're given, their bones will become weaker and weaker over time, and they will develop osteoporosis. And bear in mind, these hens only live for 18 months at best, but their lifespan is, of course, many years on top of that. So for them to have osteoporosis and broken bones and fractured bones at such a young age clearly shows that, of course, these animals are having nutrient deficiencies, and that deficiency is, of course, calcium, because they're laying so many eggs. So if you therefore have a hen who's producing these eggs and you keep taking the eggs off them, you're still, in a sense, perpetuating that ailment, so to speak. And now hens will actually eat their own eggs. If you crack the egg and give it to them, you could even scramble the eggs and give the eggs back to them. And they'll consume the eggs and eat the eggs themselves. And what that does is that replenishes the lost nutrients. And if you think, well, it's a bit weird to feed the egg back to the hen, I mean, is it not weird for us to take the egg and eat it ourselves? And if actually feeding the egg back to the hen helps the hen, well, then why wouldn't we do that? Because it's also really, really weird for us to consume the eggs that come from the bodies of chickens or any bird or any animal for that matter. So that's weird. So it's not really comparatively any weirder to give the egg back to the hen because it helps them, and they do it in the wild if they have to survive, I believe. So actually it's a really nice thing to do because it means they can replace those nutrients, and in doing so negate or severely reduce, or massively reduce, I should say, the chances of them getting osteoporosis and having brittle and easily broken bones as they get older into their lives, especially if they've been used for 12 months, 18 months in a farming situation where their bones will have already taken a massive hit and will already be struggling. For us to continue taking the eggs and allowing that to continue, it means that we're also perpetuating that, that issue. And in doing so, we could actually shorten their lives because we're continuing to take the eggs, even though they're living a happy life. If we're not necessarily replacing those lost nutrients in their feed, which can be hard to do, and if we're not aware of it either, then we could actually shorten their lives and lead to them having broken bones, osteoporosis, and dying at a younger age than they would if we just fed their eggs back to them. Also, hens like to lay clutches, collections of eggs, several eggs. And so when we take the eggs away from them, it means that they're constantly trying to lay a clutch. And so it actually encourages the hens to produce more eggs and lay more eggs. So if you leave the eggs with the hens as well, then it could actually reduce the number that they produce, which of course is great because it's putting less strain on their bodies. I mean, let's bear in mind that for a hen, passing an egg is like them having a period, and it is painful and it is uncomfortable for them. And then we subject them to this pretty much every single day of their life when we don't have to. And so if we can do something that reduces the number of eggs they produce, takes the strain off their body, and takes some of that pain out of their life and makes their lives even more comfortable, then again, of course, we're obliged to do so. And if taking their eggs contributes to more suffering, contributes them to having to experience pain that they wouldn't have to experience if we didn't take their eggs, well, then we're obliged to leave their eggs, because to take their eggs knowing that this could happen to them would not be a moral act. So for that reason, again, it takes the strain away from their body, can encourage them to lay less eggs. So that's another really good thing to do. But let's say, for the sake of argument, the hens, you fed back the eggs to the hens, and they've eaten some of them, but they don't eat all of them, and some of them go to waste, in the sense of they just rot on the floor and you have to clean them up maybe. Or let's say that you leave the eggs with the hens to lay a clutch and stuff, and then those eggs go rotten, and so you have to throw them away. And so in your eyes, you're thinking, well, these are wasted eggs. The hens haven't eaten them. It's serving no purpose. I just have to pick them up and throw them in the bin when they are now beginning to rot. Why can't I take a few then? And for me, this is where the ethical idea comes into play. Because part of veganism isn't simply not eating these products. That's a consequence of veganism, but it's not the purpose of veganism. The purpose of veganism is to shift our perception of what an animal's life means to us and also to them. And so an animal's life in a vegan world belongs to them, and what they produce belongs to them and isn't there for us. Part of being vegan is the understanding that an animal's life is not here for us to use, and their life is not here, for us to have dominion over. It's the idea that they're born into this world just as we are, and as we are animals as well, and want to have our autonomy as much as we possibly can and our freedom as much as we possibly can. Then those are the basic things that we should grant to other non-human animals as well. It's that idea of animals don't exist for us and they're not ours to use or to commodify or to take from. So when we take the eggs from a hen, we're not shifting into that mindset. We still have that mentality of, well, this hen is producing something for me. Their life has value to me based on what they produce, not because they are, an individual and they provide me with companionship and joy. And, it's not a symbiotic relationship in that way. It's almost like well, I've given you a home. I've rescued you from a farm, so you owe me. It's kind of like, that's the deal, isn't it? It's like, well, I've done this nice thing for you, so the least you can do is provide for me. And that's really problematic because it's still, in a way, a form of enslavement, like a psychological enslavement. And of course, it's different to what happens to them in commercial farms. But that's not really the point, is it? It's that mindset, that mentality of you produce for me, and so your life's purpose is producing for me. And I think that's a dangerous mentality to have. And it might not even be a conscious mentality. And it may feel completely harmless. And yes, the hen may not be physically suffering, but like I said before, it could contribute to a shorter lifespan and an increased risk of diseases and chronic illnesses. But the way I see it is, let's say we get rid of all farms, egg farms. We get rid of all animal farms, and so we're living in the vegan world right now. So we're in this vegan world. No animals are being used for in farming scenarios. And what happens now is we've got these backyard hens because caring people have rescued these hens. And so now they're consuming their eggs. And let's say that someone down the street, you're living in this little neighborhood, in this cul-de-sac, and you have some hens and they're producing eggs and you're eating those eggs. And then say your next door neighbor, Sheila, she sees that you're eating the eggs and she asks you if you've got a couple of eggs you can spare for her because, she misses eggs and it's no problem, right? We're in a vegan world now and animals aren't suffering, in farms. So it's fine now. So you say, yeah, sure, Sheila, have a couple of, these hen's eggs. I never get through them all anyway. So of course you can have a couple of eggs. And then maybe Bob from across the road speaks to Sheila one day and she says, oh, next door neighbors are giving me some eggs. And Bob thinks, I quite fancy some eggs. I mean, Sheila's doing it and they're doing it, so it must be fine. And we're in a vegan world after all, so what's the problem? All the violence towards animals has finished in that sense. And so Bob comes a knocking on the door and he's like, hey, Sheila said she's getting a couple of eggs off you, every now and then. Could I do the same? And you're like, yeah, okay. And then it starts to get word around the neighborhood and all of a sudden people are coming asking you and you're thinking, well, I don't know, like maybe I could sell some of these eggs. I need a bit of passive income, so to speak. And so, I could sell these eggs. Maybe I'll sell a couple of quid or whatever it is, a couple of dollars, whatever it may be. And you think, well, hang on, this is quite good. So I'm going to get some more hens. I know my vegan friend down the road, he's got some hens and maybe I could ask if I could rehome his, or, I've got a friend who's moving out of the country and so they need to give their hens away. So maybe I could take their hens on and now I've got twice as many hens, twice as many eggs. And so I should start selling them to my neighborhood. And then it kind of goes from there. And before you know it, there's a system where we're buying and selling eggs and we're commodifying their bodies. And then the dangerous thing is the situation we're in now didn't happen all at once. It's kind of like a step-by-step process. And when you take like small steps, it's easy to justify those small steps. So in your head, it's easy to justify taking the eggs because, well, they're living a good life. Then it's easy to justify giving them to Sheila because, they're living a nice life and you've got a couple spare. And then Bob comes a knocking, it's just one small step extra. And it makes sense. And then all of a sudden, these small steps, you turn around, you've taken a few giant leaps, and all of a sudden you're selling eggs again. And you're viewing animals as something who produce something for you, which is where we are now. It's like a culmination of small steps. All of a sudden, we've got a factory farming scenario. Now, this may sound extreme, but it's that mentality and that mindset. And that's what we're trying to get over, the mentality of animals producing for us or providing for us. And if we continue taking their eggs because, well, we like them and it seems fine, well, that mentality is still in place, even if it's a lot more subtle and even if it's nowhere near as insidious or sinister, which, of course, it isn't, but it still remains. And that leaves a dangerous precedent almost for what will happen in the future, because we don't have dogs so that we can consume their milk, and we don't rescue cats so that we can, eat them once they're instead. The animals that we love in our homes, we love them for what they provide for us in terms of their personality and their individuality, not because they produce something physical that we can consume. Hens are almost unique in that sense that a lot of people have hens just for that reason. But if you said, I would like a dog so that I can consume their flesh once they're killed, the people would think you were crazy. And that was horrible, because it would be. It's disrespectful, and it's not fair on that animal, but it's also disrespectful to rescue hens and then take their eggs, because it's a form of exploitation in the sense of you're viewing them as an object who provides for you. And you may love them, and of course all of these things, and I wouldn't deny that necessarily, but it's still not right. And it's still that mindset and that mentality, and that's what we need to overcome in a vegan world. It's not simply no longer having farms and no longer killing animals in slaughterhouses. It's living more harmoniously and understanding that an animal's life is their right. And of course, if we no longer breed hens into existence for eggs and stuff, then there will be no backyard hens in future, because we won't need them, because we won't be rescuing them from farms. And so in a vegan world, it's almost a null argument anyway of the backyard eggs, because they shouldn't be existing, because we wouldn't need to rescue them or breed them to begin with. So why take eggs from them now? Because in the future, if we want a vegan world, that's a world where there isn't these animals that need rehoming. So let's just stop eating eggs from any hen, regardless of whether it's caged, free range, organic, or from our friend's backyard. Let the hens be hens, let them live the life they want to live. And if you've rescued hens, then thank you so much. But please don't take their eggs, because they're their eggs. Feed them back to them, let them have their clutch, or just dispose of them. Because if we say we're vegan, but then people see us consuming eggs, it sends a mixed message. We have to stand by the philosophy of veganism and the morals of veganism, and to convolute that, to confuse that with these add-ons. Oh, I'm vegan, but I have backyard eggs. It's like, there's no but to that. I'm sick of this, I'm vegan, but, or I'm this percentage. It's like, can we just do it, please? Can we just, stick to it? Say this is how we are. Say this is why this is why we're vegan. Say this is why we don't consume those products, why we choose actively not to. And let's just stick to that. And let's not try and find excuses to do something we don't have to do. And for me, the backyard egg one, it's kind of like it's almost like an excuse. Oh, well, I can have these eggs. It's like, well, no, you're vegan, please. Like, let's not send mixed messages out. It's challenging enough as it is to get people to understand veganism is not a diet. It's a philosophy. It's a way of life. It teaches you to abstain from exploitation and suffering in all animals, human and non-human. So let's not grey it and muddy the waters by having these little asterisks with add-ons and buts and exceptions. The backyard egg isn't an exception, and nor should we treat it as such. And so that's my views on it. It's a question I get asked a lot, and I understand it. And I'm not trying to be critical in the sense of, saying people that ask me that, it's horrible. Or if you're a vegan and you've had those backyard eggs and not thought about it in this way, I'm not saying you're, not a vegan because of that, but you have to think about these things. And I hope now that you've listened to this and you maybe have an understanding, that means you won't do that again. Even if it seems that everything is fine, there's the mentality, the mindset, and it can lead, and it's a dangerous precedent to set. And in the vegan world, it's pointless anyway, because we won't have these hens. So let's just get there quicker. Let's not make excuses along the way. Veganism is a philosophy that says to not use, to not exploit, and to not harm others. And backyard eggs may not be as obvious, but it's still a subtle usage, and it can still subtly harm them if it leads to broken bones, osteoporosis, and the mindset of use. So that's kind of my views on it, and I hope that all makes sense and that clears kind of that conundrum up for many people. But it's an interesting question, and I like it because it poses kind of that moral ambiguity. And for me, this question isn't particularly morally ambiguous, but I think on face value, when you don't think about it, it does seem morally ambiguous. So I think it's a good one to ask, and I think it's a good one to think about and to challenge in many ways. So for all those who asked me that question before, I hope that clears it up, and I hope that kind of gives you an insight into the backyard egg argument. So we'll move on now. And so the next question, which is another one that I get asked a lot, is that notion of remaining calm. I do a lot of these interviews, or at least I have a lot of conversations with people. And one of the things is, people say that, I do well to remain calm, in the sense of I don't become irate, and well, obviously sometimes I do, but for the most part I don't become irate and I don't become angry, I guess is the word. So I remain kind of fairly composed and fairly calm. So I guess, and people ask me, well, how do you do that? Because it's easy to understand why we can get to the point of feeling irate and why we might become frustrated. And I think, it's not that I don't become frustrated and I don't become maybe internally irate. But I think it's about, for me, being effective is about being composed yet assertive. And I think there's something quite profoundly powerful about someone who, if you've seen probably lots of debates online, vegan, maybe nothing to do with veganism, just debates in general. And there's always something quite powerful about someone who remains composed but is assertive. And being calm doesn't mean that, or not becoming frustrated doesn't mean that you're somehow diminishing the power of the words that you're saying or the message behind them. I think that assertiveness can really shine through. And I think it's almost easier to become assertive if you have a demeanor that is almost contradictory in many ways. It's an interesting message for someone who's talking to you and you have a composed demeanor, but what you're saying doesn't necessarily reflect the laid back approach and is slightly more assertive. So for me, there's a couple of ways into it, and these are what helps me. And of course, I'm not going to make the claim that I always get it right, because of course I don't, and nor should anyone. There's not that expectation. But I think it's about a pattern, and a consistency wherever possible. And so for me, what I realized early on was when I would get frustrated and angry, it was often because I didn't know how to reply to someone. I didn't know what to say back to them. And it was almost like they would give me an excuse or an argument to try and debunk veganism. I didn't know how to respond. Therefore, I would get annoyed at myself, and therefore I'd get angry at them because they've put me in that position, because I feel guilty, because I feel like I'm letting the animals down. And it's like a nasty, vicious circle of frustration and annoyance and all of these different things. And so for me, I realized that the way to probably combat the most common times, or the most common way, or what's the word? I guess not the trigger, but the thing that would make me most annoyed was simply just to be a bit more educated in the most common arguments, so to speak. And so it came down to two things, which is research and practice. And it's always seems so simple, really, doesn't it, when you say practice and education? But what I mean is, take the time out to learn as much as you can. All the excuses, or at least, the ones that you hear most often. Take the time to research them, to look up good ways of arguing back against them, and then practice it. And so by practice, I mean, of course, going to AVs or having conversations with people, but it could just be practicing with a friend, your partner, your roommate. It could just be with yourself, say out loud an excuse, then respond to that excuse. What do I say in this situation? If you have a friend or a family member or someone, then they can give you the excuse, and you can have like a mock conversation. Just get them to rattle off different excuses, and you have to respond to them as best as you can, and just get yourself into that frame of mind of knowing what to say when the situation arises. For me, I think that's a really key way, because then when you're having a conversation with a non-vegan and they spring that excuse upon you, or that argument, or that question, or that line of thinking, whatever it may be, you're prepared, and you don't have to get angry because you know exactly what you want to say. And knowing what to say is a really great way of avoiding it and staying calm, because you can go, I've got this one, right? I know this one. I've done this several times before. I know what to say. And so you can just say it. And then you can say it because you practiced it, because you're confident in it. You can be assertive. And assertive doesn't mean being rude or anything. It just means that you're, it's not about being blunt necessarily. It's just about being true to what you're saying. And I think that for me, that was the big thing, research and then practicing. And of course, part of the problem is often we know what to say. Just when the time comes to say it, it can be difficult. We can get clammed up, or we can kind of, not get the words out properly. And so that's where the practice comes into play. But even if, there is obviously a difference between practicing with a friend and then practicing with someone who's taken what you're saying seriously and is maybe looking for an argument. So it'll take practice in a real world scenario as well to kind of get you to that point. And of course, there's the old saying that practice makes perfect. Of course, perfection doesn't exist, but practice no doubt does help. And before long, you'll probably be surprising yourself with how confident you feel and how effective you feel you're being in those conversations. When 6 months ago you'd find yourself getting angry and upset and annoyed, now you're feeling that you can actually have a really beneficial conversation, which is mutually respectful, doesn't end up with an air of animosity, but is effective and has established something or gained the respect of someone to the point where they actually agree with you or acknowledge that you have, views that are worth considering. And that's the idea of those conversations, is to get someone to respect the ethos of veganism and to understand the views, not necessarily to turn them vegan on the spot, but to put the mindset into them that this vegan thing makes sense, and there is logic behind it, which often we fail to see before we've been spoken to about it. People don't understand why someone would want to be vegan until often they've had that conversation. So That's the purpose. So it is about practice, and it is about research. And for me also, it's about bearing in mind why we're doing what we're doing. And what I mean by that is, if we're going out there to have conversations with people because we want to help animals, then we have to kind of think to ourselves, well, what's the most beneficial thing to help someone? And of course, it differs situation to situation, depending on the person you're talking to, and all of these different things. There's environmental factors, of course. But, primarily, I think for the most part, especially if you're going to kind of conventional outreach events, Anonymous the Voiceless, of course, is, the prime example of that. For me, and what I find, and I think others may agree, the most effective way of doing it is just having a very calm and often polite conversation. And you can disagree with someone, but disagree, and the conversation can be, a debating style conversation, but it can still be polite. And so I find that that's, for me, the most effective way. And I know that others feel the same. And so the point I'm trying to make is, if you bear in mind what it is you're trying to do, then in your head, there's a certain level of accountability, because you want to be as effective as you can for that reason. So if you're trying to help the animals, when you're going out and you're advocating, think of the animals. And of course, that seems counterintuitive, because you think, well, I'm going to think of what happens to the animals. I'm going to think of this person justifying and trying to condone what's happening to animals, and therefore I'm going to get angry at them. But actually think about the animals in the sense of, let that hold you accountable, so that you say to yourself, I am here to do a job, and that job is to help the animals. And if I'm doing something that is ineffective in this situation, then I am not helping them, and therefore I am not achieving the potential of what I should be able to achieve in this situation. And I find it's a good way of holding yourself to a certain level of accountability, to say, I want to get angry. It would feel good for me to be angry, because it's like a self-serving emotion, isn't it? Anger. It feels nice sometimes to tell someone how you feel about them and what you want to say, and to put them on the spot and make your voice and your views heard in that way. But it's a self-serving thing. It provides a short-term pleasure, but it doesn't help in this situation. So you may get angry at someone. You may want to tell them, oh, you're an animal abuser. This is what you pay for. This is that. You're responsible for this. But it may feel good to get that off our chest, but it doesn't help. And it certainly doesn't help the animals who we're there to try and advocate on behalf of. So hold yourself accountable. And if you feel like, I'm going to get angry, I can feel this bubbling up inside of me. I can feel this emotion, whatever it is. Just think, okay, well, I'm here to do a job, and I've got to do it properly. So I'm going to suppress that. I'm going to internalize that. I can rant with my friend afterwards. When AV's finished, I can go up to them and say, you'll never guess what this guy said. He was saying this, and it made me so angry. Express it that way at the end. I think that happens a lot of these events. You'll have a conversation, then you'll go up and speak to someone who is in the group, and you'll say, you'll never guess what that person said. They were trying to say, oh, well, plants have feelings, so therefore I'm allowed to pay for cows to be slaughtered. And when someone says that to you, your first reaction in the conversation will be like, oh my God, how can you say that? But it wouldn't be the effective thing. But afterwards, you can say, oh, I couldn't believe he said that. I wanted to be like, well, shut up. I can't believe it. That's ridiculous. And then you can kind of, express your frustrations afterwards. But in that moment, you go, I'm here to do a job. I'm going to internalize that. I'm going to laugh about it with my friend afterwards. But for now, I need to help the animals. So I'm going to say something along the lines of, well, yeah, but, animals have central nervous systems. Or, but are you aware that it takes vastly more plants to feed someone on a non-vegan diet that doesn't have a vegan diet? So, going with the logic, going with the rational thinking, going with the argument that helps them understand why that point is null. And then afterwards you can say, that was stupid, I can't believe you said that. So hold yourself accountable is what I'd say. So practice, research, and accountability. Those are the three things that I think help me. Like I said, perfection doesn't exist, so we're not always going to get it right, and that's okay. The most important thing is that we consistently get back to, we consistently do it as well as we can. And if you mess up one time, reflect on that, a bit of self-analysis. Why did I get annoyed? Was it an excuse I'd not heard before? Was it the type of person I was speaking to? Was I wasting my time with someone who was clearly just out to rile me up and I wasn't in a productive conversation? Should I have taken a step back? Should I have said, enough is enough in this particular situation and not try to push it? Why is it I got to that point? And the next time you can try your best to avoid getting to that situation again. So practice, research, accountability. And then when things don't always go to plan, which they might not always, and that's fine, a bit of self-analysis, self-reflection, and try and avoid it from happening again in the future. And I guess that would be my kind of advice for, how to remain calm, really. but definitely the education side of it and just the repetition. The more you do something, the easier it gets, the less nervous you become, the more prepared you'll be. That for me is it. But we're not always going to get it right, and that's okay. We just got to just do our best all the time, and hopefully our best is good enough. And if it's not, we just have a little self-reflection and we just try and grow a little bit, change it a little bit, and go from there. I hope that answers that question, which is one I hear a lot again. I think it's a really good one, and I think that's that's kind of always been my approach to it as well. But like I say, different strokes for different folks, and it's not always it's not always about that. But I think for the most part that was what helps. So moving on then. The next question is dealing with family and friends that aren't vegan, and this is definitely one of the hardest things. This social aspect of veganism is a credible thing in the sense of that is something that makes veganism hard. Like, we often say going vegan isn't hard, going vegan is easy. There's no problems. There's so many alternatives. There's substitutions. You won't miss anything. You can cook all your food. Blah blah blah. But there is that social aspect which makes it tricky, especially if you've got a friendship group and you're the only vegan in there, and all of a sudden the dynamic of the group is, everyone's teasing you and trying to mock you, and that's really uncomfortable. And they're your friends and you've been friends for years, maybe friends from childhood or whatever, and you've got good memories and you don't want to lose those friends, but all of a sudden you feel, oh no, this is terrible. And so it's a very common problem, I think, amongst vegans, family and friends who aren't vegan. And it's also a very real problem that should be addressed and shouldn't be overlooked simply because being vegan as an actual act of buying vegan foods is easy. It doesn't mean that all these other aspects of it, the social aspects of it, are equally as easy, because they're not. And so the first point I'd make is I think it is important to try and have vegan friends. So try and join like a local activism group if you can. If you live in a city and there's an AV or something, then by all means go along and join it. It doesn't mean you have to no longer be friends of your other friends. It just means there's no harm in having more friends, especially if those friends align with you on that level as well. So do try and join an activism organization, or at least try and meet people online if you can who are vegan, who you can talk to and express yourself to. Otherwise, of course, it's easy to become alienated and feel isolated and lonely, and we don't want that. Especially for new vegans, we don't want that. So, do try and join your activism organizations. And if you run an AV or you go to an AV and you see someone who's new there for the first time, then make an effort to speak to them. Make them feel included. It's a nerve-wracking thing going to something like that for the first time and having to meet new people, and it's scary. So if someone's there for the first time, then chat to them, get to know them, let them know who you are, talk to them, ask them how long they've been vegan, ask them what inspired them to come to the AV. Just make some conversations. They feel like there's a reason for them to be there past just the activism alone, that they can make friends and feel included. And I think that's really important. If you run a save group or you go to a vigil outside a slaughterhouse, whatever the organization is, whatever the activism is, if someone new comes along, then make them feel included and make that effort to help them. I think that's really, really important. But kind of moving past that idea of making new friends, I really don't like the idea that you somehow have to disavow and disconnect and leave your old friends, and you can't be with your family and you can't spend time with them if you don't, if they're not vegan and they don't get it. I don't think that that's a healthy thing. And I know it happens to lots of vegans, and it happens to me as well. It happens to all of us, that we somewhat naturally distance ourselves, but at the same time it doesn't have to, and there should certainly never be an obligation for that to be the way either, because it's not healthy. And by being around non-vegans, we can actually influence them a lot more. So, you might go out for a meal with your non-vegan friends and you might end up in, I don't know, you might all go to Carl Jr.'s if you live in the US, and they're all getting the beef burgers and you get the Beyond Meat burger, the vegan, of course, vegan one without the non-vegan bits in it. And you're like, hey guys, just have a bite of this, or it's just kind of like you're there and you're taking part and you're not missing out on anything, and you're still going to these places and eating these foods and nothing changes. It just normalizes veganism to these people. But if you go vegan, you're like, I can't be around you anymore because you're doing this, then it makes it seem a little bit irrational, and it also makes other people scared of being vegan, because it's almost like you have to isolate yourself and you have to separate yourself from society to be vegan, which is not true. And we shouldn't perpetuate that idea unless, of course, you want to separate yourself. There's no obligation to, but there's also no obligation to remain friends with people simply because, you feel like you need to. Do what you feel is right for you and not what someone else tells you. But there is definitely something to be said about, if you're going out for food, making a point. If you go to Pizza Hut in the UK and you can get a vegan pizza, and it's almost like you're making a point of, I don't miss out on anything. nothing will change in our group dynamic. Every single one of us could be vegan and we still do the same things we do now. I think it's a good message to send. Same with family. If you do Christmases and you go home for Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever it is, and you have a meal that is befitting of the tradition, befitting of the event, so to speak, then it's a signifier of I've not given anything up. I'm still enjoying Thanksgiving. I'm still enjoying Christmas. I'm still enjoying whatever event it may be. Halloween with vegan chocolate, whatever it is. And so you don't have to miss anything, and everything goes on just as normal, except we're not harming animals. I think that's it can be a really powerful thing. So if I give you like a real world example, there is something called the Liberation Pledge. For those of you who may have heard of it, then this will not need an explanation. But for those of you who have not heard of it, then of course it will need an explanation. And so the Liberation Pledge is where you take a pledge to not consume or not to be around people who are eating animal products. And so the idea of it is you don't sit at a dinner table if someone's eating animals, you don't go out for a meal if someone's eating animal products, and you're saying to them that I won't normalize this. There's this concept that if you sit down at table and your friend is consuming an animal product and you're kind of making conversation with them and you're kind of acting as if it's fine, your friend thinks it is fine. But if they sit down with, say, a lasagna made with cows, and you say that has animal products in, therefore I'm not going to be around when you're eating it because I don't think it's acceptable, and I will not normalize this and I will not enable this. It sends a direct message to them that they're doing something wrong. And it's like the idea of we need to make people feel like they're doing something wrong. And so that's the idea. And I think that there is merit to that in many ways. The idea of I'm not going to partake in this. You're going to eat that. Therefore, I'm going to step outside. I'm going to step away. Talk to me when you're no longer harming animals, or in that moment you're no longer harming animals, and then we can be friends again. It's that kind of idea. And as I say, I think there is merit to it, and I think it can send a message. But I think I used to probably subscribe to this a bit, but I'm not sure if I subscribe to it anymore as being an obligation. I think there was a time where I thought that we should all do it. I don't feel that way now. Would I personally want to be around people eating animals? It really depends. So let me give you a real world scenario that I found myself in last year. It was my grandparents' 60th wedding anniversary. So the whole family were getting together and we're all going to celebrate this thing. It was, a lovely thing. They've been married 60 years. It's very beautiful. So we're all going to go, all the family, the extended family, everyone, we're all going to get together and have a big meal. So they'd booked out this kind of conferencey thing, like it's like a hotel anyway. And it was all going to be catered for, it was going to be a big celebration. All the family with their uncles, aunts, cousins, nieces, nephews, the whole shebang. And so I was faced with this dilemma of, well, obviously I want to go and see my grandparents and, be part of the celebration. But if it's a meal, I don't want to be around people eating it, and I don't want to normalize it. And so the make or break moment really was when the menus came through the post and I could see exactly what was going to be served, but also importantly what the vegan menu would be. I was told there'd be a vegan menu, but it was what was on the vegan menu that would signify whether or not I should go. So for example, the open the menu and the non-vegan one is like chickens, pigs, it's like, a rich decadent dessert, something like that, the standard. And then the non-vegan menu is, it's just so uninspired, isn't it? It's what you'd expect from like a non-vegan place trying to find a vegan menu. It's got I think the dessert was fruit salad, and the star was, I don't know, probably some sort of soup or something. I'm not sure. It was really uninspired, and it didn't give a good impression of what vegan food could be. And so I made the decision, no, I'm not gonna do it because I think it sends a bad impression of what vegan food can be. Now, that said, I opened up that menu and it was like the main was like a Beyond Meat burger, and it was like a rich New York style baked American cheesecake with ice cream. The starter was seitan, chicken, whatever it was. If it was like a really good vegan menu, and well, then I think I would have done it. I think I would have sat at the dinner table or, in the tables in the room with them and consumed it, because I'd be saying to people, look, I'm eating this big, rich cheesecake. I'm having this burger. It's amazing. It's delicious. It's satisfying. And it would generate conversations. But otherwise, I'd have been sat there and I'd have been having like grapes, and apple juice as a dessert, where everyone else is eating these big cheesecakes or whatever their dessert was. And it was sending the message of veganism is about, it's about not enjoying food. It's about not being able to eat the foods you used to enjoy. And I felt that sent a really detrimental message. So I didn't eat with them. And so my reasoning for that was, well, I don't feel comfortable being around people consuming animal products, and so I will not be with you. And then when you finish the meal, what I'll do is I'll come in and I will I'll be with you all when we're kind of celebrating post meal and doing the pictures and all that aspect of it. And so that's what I did. I went up and I spent the day with them. And when it came to the time of the kind of late lunch, so to speak, I just had brought my own packed lunch, and I just sat kind of in the hotel lobby, went for a walk around the grounds, and then came back once they'd all finished eating. And that was quite good because people were asking me some questions. So my cousins were like, "Oh, okay, well, why do you not want to do that?" And so I could explain to them. And so that generated conversations in that way, in the same way that I could have generated conversations if I'd had a really good vegan meal. So I think what I'm saying is, with the Liberation Pledge, I think it's too restrictive. And I think there are merits to being able to eat vegan food in front of non-vegans if that vegan food hits a standard that makes it desirable and makes it interesting to the non-vegan. But at the same time, if you're eating crap food and it just so happens to be vegan because it's fruit, something, not that there's anything wrong with fruit, by the way, big up fruit, but if it's a fruit salad for dessert when everyone else is eating something decadent, then it doesn't send the best impression of what vegan food is. And I think the Liberation Pledge, there is a good intent there. I think it lacks the pragmatism and the real world, the real world consequences of what these things can mean, or what these things can lead to, or what these things can involve. And I think it's dangerous to expect vegans to take this Liberation Pledge because it makes it naturally isolating and alienating, which could in turn make it difficult for people to be vegan and sustain veganism, in their own life if they don't know any vegans and they're isolating themselves from the friends and family they already have. That's probably not very good anyway. And so I think it's I get it, I do. And there was a time where I think I probably really subscribed to it, but I don't anymore. And that's not to say I want to willingly go around and be around people eating these products, and but if there's a reason why it could be effective, and then we should take it. And it's almost, and I don't mean this in the negative way, but it's almost, well, I say in a negative way, in a critical way, it's almost selfish to say, well, I don't want to eat around you because it'll make me feel uncomfortable. But if you could go to Carl Jr.'s or A&W or wherever and get a Beyond Meat burger and say to your friend, you know what, you could even say, look, I will buy you this burger, right? Let's go to A&W together, the fast food chain in Canada that has the Beyond Meat burger. Let's go together and I will buy it for you. But if your friend's like, oh, we're going to go to A&W, and you're like, I'm not going to go, well, then you're missing out on an opportunity to show them that you can take part in that activity. And not only that, you can enjoy it just the same, in fact more, because you feel good, morally good, as well as just the satiating, the pleasure of the satiation. So I think there could be something that's selfish about it, because it's about the me aspect. It will make me feel uncomfortable. I won't enjoy it. It will make me feel gross. Whatever it is, it'll make me upset. It's almost a self-orientated idea. But if you can go, I, of course, will not enjoy seeing someone eat the cow flesh burger from Carl Jr. or from A&W, but by me being there, I can show them I can get the Beyond Meat burger and it's delicious. Then that sends has a profound impact and says something quite, profound to the friends I'm with. Therefore, yes, it'll make me feel uncomfortable, but I think that it is a justifiable and right thing for me to do, because it could actually help orientate or change the orientation of their mindset, and could generate conversations that I won't be able to have if I stay at home. Because if I stay at home, my friends are probably going to be like, Ed didn't come out with us because, he can't come to these places, and we can't do things with Ed anymore. He's so boring now, he's vegan. And although, the connotation isn't directly veganism is boring, it's like, being vegan means you can't do this and you can't have fun and you can't be with your friends. And so I'm not necessarily entirely critical of the notion of the Liberation Pledge, but I am critical of the idea that it's an obligation and that everyone should do it, and that it's a more moral or even more quote unquote vegan thing to do. Like, it's more, vegans should do this. No. It's not. We live in a complicated world, and it's not always some black and white. There's this whole sometimes spectrum of grey in the middle that we sometimes lose sight of if we get too dogmatic in that sense. So that's my views on the Liberation Pledge, which relates back to the friends and family. So what I'm saying is, if you feel comfortable being around your friends and family doing it, then by all means, if you can make a conversation out of it, then that's great. But that does lead to the question of is it appropriate to always bring veganism up? And it's so challenging, isn't it? Because with friends and family, why it's so hard is because we are so kind of close to them, and we are worried about maybe upsetting them, or we are worried about maybe, putting some strain in the relationship and making it awkward between us all. So we do naturally have an air of self-restraint when chatting to our friends and family about these issues. So I think it isn't always effective, and it isn't always the right time to bring it up. But I think if you live at home or whatever, or you live with some flatmates or some roommates, then something that could be good to do is maybe buy in some oat milk, or buy in some vegan cheese, or buy in some vegan products, and let them try it. Because I think a big drawback is people don't want to buy something they've not bought before because they might not like it. And a pound might only be a pound, or a dollar might only be a dollar, but it's still money you don't want to spend if you don't have to. And if you know that you like cow's milk already, why would you risk buying oat milk or soya milk for your coffee if you know cow's milk's fine and it's reliable for you, and it's, you know, it's just what you've always bought. So maybe give them a little help and buy them some oat milk so they can have their coffee or the tea, or in their porridge oats or whatever it is, because then you can change people's mindsets and mentality, and that can be quite a powerful thing to do. So when dealing with, handling friends and family situations, sometimes just help them out a little bit by understanding why they may be reluctant. You know, if you're living at home and you're like 14 and you're like, Mom, can you please just buy me this? And she'll be like, why am I going to spend extra money on something when I don't need to? And you can be like, okay, well, let me buy it. And if you like it, then let's both get it, because, or whatever it is, you know, that could be a dynamic or a situation that you find yourself. And likewise, maybe you go out and you're buying coffee somewhere, or I'm going to use the example again. Say you've gone to A&W with your friends or your family, and, you know, and you can afford to, will offer to buy them, say, I will buy this meal, but we're all getting the Beyond Meat burgers, right? And then they'll have them and they'll recognize they're delicious and lovely. And then next time they might buy them themselves, you know, or at the very least, they're not going to be so off-put by you doing so. And so sometimes help the friends and family out by letting them try something they've not tried before. Give them an opportunity to do these things without having to worry about their own finances or their own waste of food, you know, whatever it may be. And then also, again, this idea of research is so important here, because they are going to give us excuses, and what is so important is that we're prepared and we have a response to them. So this relates back to remaining calm, because it is almost more important with our friends and family that we don't let these conversations escalate. But it's easier to allow it to happen because there's more at stake almost. You know, we care deeply about our friends and family. And so in many ways, they're the people in our life we want to most be vegan. And so we get the most frustrated and the most upset when they're the ones who are most resistant or refuse to go vegan. So it can be easy for those conversations to escalate, but it's really important that they don't. So that notion of remaining calm is even more pertinent almost to those dynamics and those conversations. So take all the notes I said from remaining calm, and apply it into these conversations with friends and family as well. Be well researched, be well practiced, because every excuse they give us, they're trying to trip us up. And if you have a response to every single excuse or every argument, or at least, you know, you have something to say back, you know, at least as much of the time as possible, then over time their arguments and their excuses and their reasoning will become less and less strong, and also less and less credible to them. And the more logic and rational thought that you have to throw back at them, the more that you being vegan makes sense to them. And it just takes time. Patience is key. You know, it really takes time to get to this point. And I don't think we can necessarily I don't think we should understate, you know, sometimes how important patience can be with friends and family. And I think we go vegan and we want to click our fingers and expect them to change with us, but they're not going to necessarily. Some do, and I think that's absolutely amazing and it's incredible. But, you know, family that go vegan when their children do, I think is really credible. And I think we do have to look at the psychological reasoning for why parents often don't go vegan straight away, or are even reluctant to the idea that their children would want to go vegan. You know, so this is kind of, I think, a really important point in the sense of our families. And I'm going to generalize here, and I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone's parents, because of course this isn't true. But I would like to think that for the most part, people's families, people's parents, they raise their children to be, you know, in the way that they would want to be raised, in the sense of they try and raise them well, and they try to give them good values, they try to raise them to be good citizens, they try to give them a good life, and they don't try to do anything, you know, particularly bad to them. Again, I know this isn't always true, and I'm sorry for that, but I think this is the main, this at least should be the overarching, you know, role of parents, is to give a child a good life, install them with good values, make them a good citizen with good morals, and you know, make them as happy as they can be, of course. And so if you've lived non-vegan all your life, say you get to 16 or 17, however old you are, you could be 40, it doesn't matter, however old you are, and you turn around and you say, look, Mum, look, Dad, I'm going vegan, And the reason I'm going vegan is I think it's immoral to kill animals. I don't think it's right, and I don't want to be a part of this violence. What you're kind of subconsciously or indirectly saying to your parents is the way you raised me is wrong. You raised me to have immoral behaviors. You raised me to commit violence, and you raised me to hurt others, to harm others. And that kind of goes against the basic, the fundamental principles of being a good parent. And it's almost like saying you've been a bad parent. You've failed in your role of parenting. You have failed, to be an adequate parent because you've installed me with immoral behaviors and you've made me harm others. And almost if you're younger and you're getting to 14 and 15, you're almost saying that you've made me do this against my will. Because the moment you start thinking for yourself and you start educating yourself, you've realized this is wrong. It's like you almost coerced me and you made me do something that I'm morally, that I find morally repugnant, but you made me do it against my will. So I think that's a scary thing for a parent to hear, and understandably so. So parents who kind of go vegan on the spot, or who listen to their children and take that information on board, I think it requires a huge amount of humility and humbleness, and almost an acceptance that even though it wasn't your fault, you may have done something kind of unconsciously wrong. You can't be held morally accountable necessarily, but you're going to feel that way. So parents who change what their children do, I think that requires something really special. But at the same time, I understand why parents don't change when their children do, because it is almost like an acceptance of, okay, I maybe did something wrong and immoral. And because they're probably maybe 40 or 50 or however old they are now, they've been doing it for a lot longer. So all those, psychological barriers, the cognitive biases, the conditioning, the indoctrination is even more deeply set within them. So it's harder for them to overcome that ideology naturally. But then they have that difficulty of maybe having to accept that they did something wrong as a parent as well to kind of come to terms with. So my goodness, I get it. It's hard. Doesn't mean that they shouldn't be held accountable. It doesn't mean that they're let off the hook because of it. But it is important to probably understand that reasoning of, it's almost an acceptance that they didn't do something right as a parent, and they made their children do something that they didn't agree with against their will. It's a horrible thing to think of as a parent, I can only imagine. So we have to understand why. But as I say, that doesn't mean that they should be let off the hook, so we should talk to them, always have a response wherever possible, try and be logical, try and be calm. And if you can get them to watch documentaries or YouTube videos or read books, then do so. What do your parents like? Are your parents environmentalists? Are they humanitarians? Are they interested in their health? Is there a supposed, genetic illness that runs in the family, like heart disease or, whatever it is? Can you find something that's unique and your parents will respond well with, and your friends as well? This counts towards friends. Maybe one of your friends is interested in conservation. Are they disgusted by hunting? Are they worried about marine animals going extinct? Are they worried about the general biodiversity issues we're having at the moment? Are they worried about rainforest destruction? Are they worried that it's 20 degrees during February in winter? All of these things. Is there something they're worried about that you can relate to veganism, and how you can make veganism something that they naturally already unconsciously agree with because of these factors? They're against animal cruelty. They donate £3 every month to the RSPCA or whatever it is. Something that symbolizes something in there that means they already relate and respond to veganism, positively. Find something like that and approach it from that angle. There's nothing wrong with getting your parents to sit down and watch What the Health over Dominion or Earthlings or Land of Hope and Glory. You don't have to make them watch something violent, towards animals in that sense. You can start off with What the Health or Cowspiracy or whatever it may be, or 73 Cows, the BAFTA award-winning documentary about Jay Wild, the farmer who donated his cows to a sanctuary and now runs a veganic farm. There are so many different ways into veganism, which is why it's really amazing. There's so many fantastic reasons to be vegan. Just find the one that your parents will respond to most at the beginning and pursue that. And of course, your friends as well. So patience, practice, always having a response, trying to be calm, trying to be understanding and empathetic, but also saying things when it's appropriate, buying products in for people to try, taking people out for meals, all of these things. And hopefully over time, you will get them to the point where they understand and, they're listening in that sense. I think that's probably my advice for that scenario. And it's kind of rich for me to say. It's almost like a do as I say, not as I do scenario, because I haven't turned my family vegan, and a lot of the friends I used to have I don't hang out with anymore, so I never turned them vegan necessarily. So it's not as if I've got this solution. I think that's kind of part of the problem, isn't it? There isn't one solution that fits all of these problems or just makes it happen instantly. And everyone's friendship groups and family dynamics are, relatively unique and individualistic. And so it's important to bear in mind that it takes time, and it'll be unique to you. And some will find it easier than others. And, and also, you haven't failed if your family and friends don't go vegan. That's a really important thing to say. Sometimes I think because they're the people in our immediate life, when we first go vegan, they're the people we want to turn vegan first. And when we fail with them, I use the word fail, it sounds too critical, but when we fail with them, we think, well, I can't go to AV and I shouldn't advocate and I should keep quiet because I'm really bad at it and I don't do a good job. And that's not fair, and it's not true either. They are notoriously the hardest people to convince to go vegan. And it doesn't mean you're not good at advocating for veganism for the animals. So you should still go to an AV, but I think it knocks out confidence. It makes us reluctant and worried because we think, well, everyone else is fine, but I can't seem to do it. It must be a problem with me. That's not necessarily true at all, and we can all get better as advocates. So if you have struggled with friends and family, still go to an AV because you're talking to people who want to listen and who want to stop and who want to talk to you, and still go on social media and have conversations with people on threads and on comment sections. Still get involved in activism and do these things because you can still impact people and change people. It's just sometimes friends and family take longer, but they shouldn't stop us from having conversations with other people that do want to listen. One of the first things I did, and I guess it's first activism things, I guess it would be like an activism thing. One of the first things I did to try and be outspoken as a vegan was send an email to my parents, an email to my mum, an email to my dad saying, look, I'm vegan, I'm vegan, but I've never told you why I'm vegan. These are the reasons why I'm vegan: a bit of health, a bit of environment, a bit of animals as well, of course. And then my mum basically replied saying that I was going to die from synthetic proteins. To this day, still trying to work out what they are, but she was obviously reluctant. She didn't agree with me. She was saying about, like, I think petroleum clothes, polyester in clothes, and different things like that, kind of some of the more generic excuses we hear. And then my dad didn't reply to that email, and so it throws you off and it knocks your confidence, because in my head I was like, I'm going to tell them. I even attached the video by Melanie Joy, why we love dogs, eat pigs and wear cows. It's about 15 minutes long and it's great. So I'd seen it and it kind of inspired me. I thought, I'll send this to my parents because it's a really easy video. It's not judgmental, it's not confrontational, it's quite the opposite. It's very understanding. Melanie Joy is saying, look, there's this thing called carnism. It's not your fault that this has happened, but look, it's wrong and immoral, and here's why: because you love dogs. My parents do love animals, and well, they love dogs and cats. So I thought it'd be perfect, and I just thought I'd send this email, and that would be that. They'd be vegan, and everything would be happy and joyous, and we'd have big vegan Christmas dinners, and do vegan things, whatever they may be. I'm not what's a vegan thing? Eating delicious vegan food, of course. But I thought we'd have a big celebration. It'd all be wonderful, but it didn't happen like that, and it very rarely does for people when it comes to family. And so it does knock you a little bit, and it can make you angry and frustrated. It did for me. But then actually having conversations with people on the street helped a lot, because it made me realize, I can still advocate and I haven't failed. It's just harder and with family. And so I think that's important. And over time it's become easier, and they listen and watch to what I do and take it on board. And whether or not they're vegan or not, I mean, they're not currently as far as I'm aware, but we're at much, for me, I'm at a much happier point in the sense of, I think they're more aware of why I'm vegan. And they'll probably be, my mum might be less quick to try and find an excuse against it, perhaps. If she's listening now, I don't know, maybe she'll tell me otherwise. But, hopefully there's a bit more understanding there. And my dad, who didn't reply to me, now does listen. He does talk to me, and he is aware of what I'm doing. So, things do change, and they're not vegan necessarily, and it's taken a long time. And of course I could do it. I've done a lot more to push the message towards them. But what I'm saying is, if at first it feels terrible and you feel hopeless, just a bit of patience. And the more we have to say and the more credible we can be in our arguments, and every time they give us an excuse, if we have something to say back, over time it gets easier. So actually, well, I'll finish in a minute, but I just wanted to give a little bit of an example again with my family. So as I said, my dad didn't reply to me when I sent that email over. I saw him, I think maybe a couple of years later it was, actually, and we were talking about, I think it was about supplementation, actually. He was asking me if I supplemented. And I said, look, I'm supposed to take a weekly B12, but we all really should, because it's an issue that we all face with B12. It's to do with modern agriculture and sanitization, not to do with a vegan diet. And he was like, oh yes, I've been told to take a vitamin D supplement. And I was like, exactly, it's part of the modern world. We live in England, so we do need to take a vitamin D supplement. And having to take a weekly B12 supplement isn't a fault of veganism, and it doesn't mean we should harm animals. It's just we live in an overly sanitized, clinical world where all of our fruits and vegetables and even the animal products we consume, don't have B12 in them because of the foods the animals consume and such. And so, most B12 supplements are fed to the livestock industry. Like 90% of B12 supplements are sold to the livestock industry and supplemented into animals anyway. So what's the point? So that was a little bit of progress. And then last year, January 2018, I did a live debate with a dairy farmer on the BBC, on the Victoria Derbyshire show. And afterwards I was like, I feel quite good about this. Like I felt really happy. Like I was like, it was my first live TV appearance, and I was really chuffed with it. So I was like, I'm going to tell my family about this, because up until that point, they didn't know about what it is that I did. They weren't aware of Earthling Ed, so to speak, or the activism side of things. Obviously they knew I was vegan, but they didn't know that I was an activist, and they didn't know that I had like an online kind of platform from which I advocated. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to send this video to them and let them know, announce to my parents that Earthling Ed is alive and well, so to speak. And so I sent it to my mum, and I sent it to my dad, and my mum was like, that's great, I'll check it out later. And I was like, cool. And then my dad replied to me and was like, oh, we know all about Earthling Ed, he said. Your auntie, I think he said it was, is a big fan of yours, and we've been following you for some time and have seen your videos, and we all watched your TV appearance live this morning, including your granddad. And he was like, we're very proud of you. And I was like, wow, so that's really nice. It's come from him not replying to my original email, and a little talk about supplements, and now he's saying he's proud of me. But then he also said, I think he said, if it was, because I was like, how did it go? How do you think I did, or whatever? And he was like, oh, well, if it was a boxing match, you'd have won on points. But he also said you were very persuasive. And I was like, persuasive, you say? That's an interesting choice of words. Persuasive. So it's gone from him not replying to my email to now, a year ago I was being persuasive, and he already knew who I was, and I know he still watches the stuff that I do. And so maybe I've been a little bit more persuasive. Anyway, maybe a nice, happy point to end the podcast on is it takes time. And I remember at the beginning when I first sent those emails, I was angry, and I was angry. I was disappointed. I was angry. I was frustrated. I was upset. And I think in many ways it actually pushed me to do some of the activism at the beginning. I think that annoyance of like, okay, you're not going to listen to me then, made me want to get on YouTube and to make videos and to go on the street and have conversations to prove to myself that I could help people go vegan. I think that was part of maybe the fuel at the beginning, because it made me angry, and of course you don't want to feel angry at your parents necessarily, but you probably will at times, regardless of whether you're vegan or not. But it did kind of give me that push and that kind of sense of I need to prove this to myself. So I guess in that sense I'm grateful. Not grateful for them not being vegan, but grateful that it gave me that push. But things change, and so now I feel a lot more at ease with that side of things, at least. But yeah, maybe just a little note at the end. Sometimes it takes time. I can't say I see my family often, and as I said, I've distanced myself a lot from old friends. That's part of what happened for me organically, and I wouldn't advocate that anyone else has to follow that path. So my advice for friends and family, just to end now, is to be patient, to persevere, to choose your opportunities, to help out by buying products, to encourage them to watch, to read, to listen, to always have a response to every excuse that they say, to try and remain calm and respectful and courteous, to not allow yourself to become angry or to escalate a situation if you can possibly avoid doing so. To choose, whether or not maybe you want to eat with them, maybe you don't, to make that personal decision on your own. But I guess that's my advice. But it isn't easy, and I don't have a solution, and I don't think one exists for everyone to help everyone's different situations. But over time, as more and more people go vegan, it'll become easier for even our closest friends and family who are most ardently against it to understand and to empathize and to maybe make that change themselves. So never lose hope. Do what makes you feel comfortable. That could be taking time away from them, or it might not be. And that'll probably leave this week's episode. It's a nice thing to do, I think, to have these little Q&As actually, because there are a lot of common questions that I don't think can always be addressed, and they're a bit snappier. So I hope this has been beneficial to you, and for those of you who've asked me those questions before, I hope that really helps you. And please feel free to share this podcast around. Well, please do share it around, of course. I'd love for you to do that, but share it with any vegans who have asked you these questions before, or who maybe struggle with friends and family, or who maybe struggle to remain calm and who find themselves getting angry. Share it around. Or maybe someone vegan who has backyard eggs, or eats backyard eggs, should I say, has backyard hens and consumes their ovulations, then please share it around. But I hope you've enjoyed listening to the podcast. And at the end here, I'd just like to say a big thank you to my patrons and anyone who supports me from my website. I really appreciate all of your support and for everything that you do to allow me to keep producing this content. And I hope you enjoy it. And if anyone wants to support what I do, you can do so through Patreon and also through my website as well. And for those of you who listened to last week's podcast with Mark the Farmer, I hope you found it insightful, and I hope there was lots there to learn, and we'll have more podcasts like that coming up in the future. I've got some really interesting podcasts lined up with some very fascinating guests, so stay tuned for those. There'll be a lot more interesting insights, but if you have more questions as well, then do send them to me, and I'll make I'll compile a list of the questions, and any that I get asked frequently. I'll probably do another one of these videos at some point where I just go through the questions I think I get asked the most, and the ones that I think need responding to the most. So if there's a question you really want me to answer and respond to, then let me know, and I'll add it to my list and see if I can get through it in the future. But until next week, until next Saturday, have a wonderful week. Thank you again always for listening. If you've listened to each podcast, thank you so much. This is your first one. I hope you've enjoyed it. They were free before this. I hope you enjoy those as well. But have a wonderful week. Keep advocating for the animals. Keep pushing the movement. Keep pushing the message. Eat some delicious vegan food. Look after your other vegan comrades. And we'll speak soon. But until then, thank you so much for everything.